8 presidential hopefuls took to the stage last night for the first 2024 Republican primary debate. The name grabbing headlines is Vivek Ramaswamy. The 38-year-old biotech entrepreneur was the central figure for most of the evening, clashing with fellow candidates Nikki Haley and Mike Pence. Former President Trump, of course, skipped out on the event. He instead elected for a sit-down pre-recorded interview with Tucker Carlson that ran on X, a.k.a. Twitter. Despite his legal woes, Trump is expected to turn himself into a Georgia jail today. The former president still holds first place in polls among voters. Joining us now to dissect all of this is Steve Clemons, Semafor founding editor-at-large, and Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman, who covers these political matters for us. Steve, I want to start with you. I said Vivek Ramaswamy grabbed a lot of headlines, but not necessarily in a good way.
It depends on what you consider to be good. Vivek jumped into everything. I mean, he made Ron DeSantis look absolutely like, a choir boy and very well behaved. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, he jumped in, he made himself the news. He was bold in the way he defended President Trump's views in lots of different ways. He wasn't the most informed candidate up there, but that didn't stop him at all. And he has, I think, some very decided, I would call them hyper-realist, even isolationist foreign policy views that I had not really heard before. So he was an interesting player and, definitely the opposite of bland.
Did we have any, Rick, policy that was discussed and made clear about what a candidate would actually prioritize? If they
Vivek made it clear he would stop support for Ukraine.
Right. Oh, sure. There was a lot of policy discussion. What I look for when I watch these debates is not so much the horse race, who is doing a better job of catering to the fringe element of the Republican Party, which is the AKA the Trump base. I pay attention to who actually seems to have good ideas and might actually be electable in a general election. And I only heard maybe 2 of the 8 candidates, maybe 2.5, who sound like they have sensible ideas, pragmatic, Reagan-esque type Republicans. To go back to Ramaswamy, climate change is a hoax. Let's stop all funding for military support for Ukraine because I don't get this logic at all, because the China-Russia alliance is the biggest threat to the United States, and therefore we should stop helping Ukraine take out Russia's military, which is basically what they're doing for us. So that actually seems like a good thing by his logic. I couldn't make sense of any of his policies, but he has a good smile. Okay, he's got a lot of energy, and for all the voters who really want another tech bro to tell them how life ought to be, there's your guy.
Well,
Ramaswamy.
but
look, I think
ahead,
Rick
Steve.
said something very, very important that I want to emphasize. He's talking about those that could look qualified. Rick and I probably share a lot of views on what we want to see by way of governance and smart policy. But you made a comment about the Republican base, and right now, those people who've been succeeding with the Republican base are performers. They're the ones that play these antics, who have, somewhat thin or even vapid views when it comes to things. And that may not be what I'd like to see on stage, but it's clearly from a political perspective playing with that Republican base in a way that's going to be harder for some of the more earnest candidates to break out. I was very impressed, for instance, that Nikki Haley went out and, said right up front something is true, that Donald Trump added $8 trillion to the national debt, and that has consequences. People talked about January 6th, some of them quite thoughtful, but they got lost in the blur. So I think what Rick said is, when you kind of look at what the North Star is, the nice thing about these debates is you have many people other than the Republican base watching them. So they've got a dual performance, both for the base, but for the nation as at large.
A couple things I wanted to bring up. First of all, we were just showing a quote from Ramaswamy on the screen that he says he's the only candidate that is not bought and paid for, which is just ridiculous on its face, because he does have supporters, including some prominent ones within the tech community. But we'll leave that aside for a moment. To come back to this idea of performance versus policy, of vibe, right, as being the defining thing that drives. It's ever been thus, right, when it comes to politics. Rick, do you think that, you talk about these policies on the part of these guys, does that really matter that much?
Let's talk about economic policies. First of all, they verified how they're going to go after Biden if any of these people actually end up being the general election candidate. They're going to go after him on inflation and to a lesser extent on the debt under Biden. But the debt goes up under every president, and more or less by about the same. No candidate of any party has anything close to a plan to deal with the national debt. China. This was actually the biggest economic issue that anybody talked about, what to do about China. We have to, they want to confront China as an economic threat, a military threat. And guess what? Biden is already doing that. So I think these candidates, all of them talking about China, either don't know that Joe Biden already has a huge policy, including $1 trillion in subsidies to bring manufacturing in green energy and semiconductors away from China and other countries back to the United States, or they know Biden's doing that, and they just hope that voters don't know, and they can just sort of talk over voters on that. I think it's kind of remarkable that a lot of these Republicans, including DeSantis, who talked about this a lot when he gave his economic vision speech like a month ago, they sound like Biden on China. I mean, they are like cribbing from Biden. So there's an opportunity for Biden. I think this gets complicated, and that's a hard one for voters to suss out. But they're not that different.
Steve, who won this debate?
Donald Trump won it because he won it by his absence. Because if you watched his interview with Tucker Carlson, talking about Epstein and all of this stuff that had just virtually, eyes glazed over, it was a sprawling interview. Donald Trump was very lucky that he didn't take that bag of tricks to this debate because he might have fallen. But he won because it was smart to be the person that everyone had to sort of dance around. And when the hands went up, Chris Christie says he was just waving off the question, but all the hands were up except Asa Hutchinson's on whether they would politically support Trump if he were convicted of serious crimes. It was a remarkable moment. That was the picture. And it just showed how all of these people are essentially kowtowing to the ongoing presence and importance of Donald Trump in that party.
I just going to give a little bit different answer. Trump wasn't there. He was on some social media backwater. Nobody really saw what he had to say, I don't think. It's not even getting very much coverage, whatever he had to say last night. I thought Nikki Haley was the grown-up on the stage last night. She has sort of danced around this up till now. She's sort of danced around this idea of whether Trump is qualified to be president again. She came, as Steve just pointed out, she came right out and said, no, we really need to move on from Trump at this point. She has pretty good ideas. She understands foreign policy. Again, not what voters really vote on. But she was right. I mean, when she said to Ramaswamy, you don't have any foreign policy experience, and it shows, she was right. And she did have good ideas. So I thought she raised her profile. I don't think she has a chance. But remember, I think a lot of these people are not running for president. They're running for something other than president when they don't get the nomination.
And the one other thing that she did, I was impressed with Nikki Haley as well, even though I think Trump still won. But, she kind of chastised Mike Pence and said, you keep talking about a federal imposed 15-month abortion ban. She kept saying it will never pass in the United States. So she brought realism, legislative and political realism to the discussion, which is very rare, I think. I think a lot of people posture and pretend and get strident, and she was much more the realist in this, and that was a standout element.
All right, we got to leave things there. This, the first of just many debates. Steve Clemons, Semafor founding editor at large, and our own Rick Newman. Thanks so much for watching the debates.
Yeah, great to be with you.